Hi there! Welcome to Armchair CEO. We're trying it again. It's the name that started when my friend Fred came up with it. Then it was a segment on the podcast, and now we're pushing it one more time for SummerSlam, because can't give up on some good branding when you come across it, right? The basic premise of it, if the name isn't self-explanatory enough, is I sit down in my armchair over here and I act as if I know what the fuck I'm talking about on a given topic. Really, this is just kind of an excuse for me to talk about Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, since yesterday was the Montreal Comic-Con, and I got to try the E3 build, which, if you haven't seen it, is the version of the game that lets you actually fight against other people, not like the story demo that's online where you just kind of get to stare at the weird faces and, you know, go through what they've introduced so far. Either way, I played it, I got back in line and played it again and again and again, got more than a couple games in there, and I have some thoughts, I suppose. They're not very original thoughts, but I have some.
So I got hands-on with the 21 character build from E3, and it's nice to finally get a chance to actually play against other human opponents, because I really don't feel like that story mode demo did a good job showing off the system or giving much of a chance to learn, you know, what was going on against the AI. So this was pretty cool. We basically played, you know, that same 21 character build. It had 5 stages in it, and I guess I'll start off with what I liked. The stages definitely helped the characters look a lot better by with brighter backgrounds. They were, some of them were during the day, others were just better lit than the X-Guard and I guess that sort of like bunker stage we saw during the story mode demo. These stages were, the build itself possibly was just outdated and looked worse, but those dark stages definitely did not help, while this build looked a lot better with these brighter stages and the characters popped out a lot more. It looked a lot more lively. That being said, I still think the art style is not the best, or at least not the most interesting they could have gone with. It's, you know, besides the obvious weird faces issues, I think that it's just a little bland for the characters, and that they probably should have gone with something a little bit more daring. You know, we don't need to necessarily see full-on cell shading, but I think a much more stylistic choice for this would have been the right way to go. I think a lot of these characters from the Marvel side and from the Capcom side, you know, they're from older legacy series, and they're from, we've seen them in sprite form, we've seen them with basic colors and, you know, like 4 tones in the past. So I think something more extreme with how the characters are presented than just pseudo-realistic, you know, gradient shading, I would have been a better choice to go with. But either way, that's just my personal, you know, I guess that's my pick on how they're going with the art style. The Infinity Stone system was an interesting implementation as well. You know, as described, it replaces your third character by giving you a function. And, you know, considering some of the leaks we're seeing about, well, Rice has also come out and basically talked about what the extra stones might do, including a stone that'll sap life from your opponent and possibly revive a character. That's interesting as well. I think it's definitely a solid way to replace the function of I'm going to use the word function of the third character, that in the way that Combo Fiend talked about, where you have someone that just jumps in as an assist basically, or a combo extender or a wall bouncer. You get that off of your stones now, and it felt pretty good. I like the simplicity of that, and it, you know, it definitely gets your brain going with some possibilities for mix-ups and cross-ups, especially when you introduce the other thing I want to talk about, which is the instant tagging that lets you, you know, tag whenever you want, get your last character's buffered move out, and then you come in with your next guy doing, you know, putting the pressure on or continuing the combo. That's really fun. I love that part of the game a lot. I think the way that you bring the character in allows you to effectively create a custom assist, not unlike Skullgirls. So for those of you who've played it, Skullgirls lets you put in your own special motion on the character select screen to bring in one of your partners and do that assist move to be whatever you want it to be. In this game, you effectively get the same thing by doing the move and tagging out right afterwards, and the person that you started with, the character you started with, will finish off their move as the new one is coming in, giving you that assist coverage that you were looking for. So that's a really huge step up in terms of versatility, and I think we're going to see some really disgusting setups coming. Anyone with a command grab that teams up with someone that has the ability to put on a lot of pressure, keep you in block stun, is going to have a really gross tick throw game, for example. I can't wait to see some of the setups with that. And then, of course, you put that in with the ability to use your time gem and instantly cross up, or create projectile madness all over the screen, and it's gonna get pretty disgusting. We all know how disgusting the incoming mix-up game would get in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. If you look up X23's 300%, that should give you a good idea of how gross that got by the end of the Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 meta. You're talking unblockable, ridiculous shenanigans that, whatever, it got insane. So I think we're going to see some really gross things happening with these two systems in play together. And I guess, providing nothing breaks the creativity that these systems provide you with, and the freedom you have to, mix and match and I guess delve deep down into your duo and get more out of them than you could with the trio that you could in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is a really good thing. I think that's a strong point. I think it's very cool that they managed to, even though they shrunk the team size down from 3 to 2, you can do more with those two than you could with the 3. And that's impressive. That's impressive. I had a lot of fun with that. Otherwise, it felt like Marvel 3, and, that's fine. Marvel 3 was an okay game to play, just from the speed of it, the maneuverability, the way you pressure people, the rhythm, the back and forth. All of that was still there. All of that was still in check. Not a fan of auto combos. Hopefully you can turn those off, but it doesn't really matter much, because in the end, when you learn your own character's bread and butters, you're not going to be doing 1, 2, 3, 4 launch 1, 2, 3, 4 anyway, so that doesn't really matter in the long run. Now, as far as the negatives go, well, I mean, yeah, what are we going to talk about besides the roster, right? We can talk, well, there's the art style, and we've seen the interviews where they're talking about the fact that they might address some of the problems with Chun-Li's face or Dante's face, and hopefully they do. I would like to see larger changes. Again, like I said, perhaps something that, puts an interesting filter over the way the characters are presented or whatever. But regardless of that, the roster is the thing that, when you're looking at this list of 21 characters and you're barely seeing anyone new, it just makes so little sense, and that's the biggest, saddest part of it. When I was playing it the whole time, I went and I grabbed two of my previous team characters, Hawkeye and Spencer, and I love my team. I love those characters, but I'm looking at Spencer like, you don't make sense appearing in this game again. You were a quirky pick from the last game, and I love that you made it in there, but it doesn't make sense that you're still here now in a new game that should be about, exciting picks from the Capcom and Marvel universes that no one has seen yet. From the Marvel side, we know that the MCU is their major point of focus, so to some degree you kind of understand why their picks are what they are. You expect them to reflect what's coming up in the movies, and you're not really gonna expect them to pull anything too obscure that doesn't have a movie tie-in somewhere. When Rocket Raccoon first showed up in Marvel 3, it was like, why the fuck would this be happening? This makes no sense. But knowing that a Guardians movie was on the horizon, they set that up on purpose, of course. Now he's not going to show up unless Groot's there, and Gamora's coming, possibly. So it's definitely, something that's more set and understood on the Marvel side. But the Capcom side, there's not a ton of excuse for what we're looking at, because we can see that, like, you know, the way they've brought about so many recycled characters is possibly a result of saving money. Perhaps they don't have the full budget to go all in, but in that case, I think from the get-go, you're kind of, you know, playing it dangerously, where you're going to introduce the game with so few new characters on the Capcom side that you're going to kill off the excitement that people would have for it. I think that the fact that Capcom is recycling so much of that cast, it's crazy to me, you know. And when you're putting in someone like Arthur, you can let that rock and go, okay, fine, he's from Ghouls and Ghosts, he's a weird pick too, but sure. But then to also look at the leaks possibly and consider them real if they are, and you know, Rice has been confirmed to be a pretty legit guy. So if we're looking at that leak list and it is legit, we're seeing a character like Firebrand come back. It's like, why would you bring back? It doesn't make sense that Firebrand would show up again. It doesn't make sense that, you know, you would bring in Nemesis back when we're already questioning Chris. You know, I brought it up in the previous videos we've done, but Chris shouldn't be there. I think there's no reason that we should be looking at Chris again. Oh, and I really hope we don't end up seeing Jill again, because we've seen her 3 times. Chris has already showed up. There's no reason why we can't get someone new. We haven't seen Leon. We haven't seen Claire. We haven't seen Ada Wong. And I think it'd be very interesting to get any of those characters on the roster as a representation of what Resident Evil is, you know, outside of the things we've seen. Not to mention the fact that there's nothing from the new game either. Resident Evil 7 just came out, and I think a lot of people are going to be paying attention to that. It makes very little sense to not represent the characters from the brand new thing that's still off the shelves, that people are still talking about and thinking about. You know, a lot of those decisions are just very confusing to me. And, you know, of course Morrigan is going to show up because she has to, but at the very least that leak list does include Jeddah, which is a pick we haven't seen in a long time. Hopefully that works out. All in all, though, you know, something that I've said many times before is that besides Nintendo, Capcom has the most beloved and iconic list of IP that any game company could hope for. It's such a strong classic list, and to look at everyone being neglected, I don't need to just talk about the fact that I want to see Nero in there instead of Dante, because we've seen the other 2 characters and we want to see someone new that hasn't gotten a shot. We can just go with the people that have been, like, characters that have been neglected, or franchises that have been neglected that people love, you know. And these are not necessarily games that I'm personally attached to in you know, that sense. It's not just about, like, you know, my favorites here. It's just about the fact that Capcom has a huge legacy library that you're completely ignoring. It would be great to see anything from God Hand. Jean or Azel would be fantastic, but if that's too obscure for you, how many people love Power Stone and would want to see Falcon or Wang Tang from Power Stone showing up? Anything from Rival Schools, Onimusha, maybe Bionic Commando. Instead of Spencer, we could have gotten Super Joe from just Commando. How about anything from Dino Crisis, Breath of Fire? You know, like, there's so many Capcom, like, series out there. Like, I can keep Geist Crusher. If Asura from Asura's Wrath doesn't show up, that makes no sense. Captain Commando was fantastic. He didn't come back for the last 2 games. It'd be great to see him again, or anyone from the Commando team. Ghost Trick, Sengoku Basara. Fuck it, throw in Dark Void. And I don't even remember her name, but the girl from Remember Me. Like, you can grab a ton of Capcom games and pull an interesting roster out of there. And it's just weird when I look back and I think that this roster was so safe and so recycled that it makes Capcom Fighting Evolution arguably Capcom's worst fighting game. It makes that roster look better in comparison. It looks more adventurous and more interesting. I'm baffled by that, and when I was playing it at the Comic-Con, I felt it hard. I felt that, you know, so many of the matches I was playing were new backgrounds and, you know, a new system with gems, but I felt like I was playing a third release of Marvel 3. I felt like I was playing a remix of Marvel 3, and there's so many matchups where I was approaching them in the exact same way that I had over the years with the last game. And that's not what I want when I think about a new Marvel game, and I think that's not what the majority of the fans want either. So, you know, when it comes down to it, it's the one glaring flaw here that just they really should address it, and I think that they might, because there's no way that a lot of this is falling on deaf ears, despite the awkward interviews that pop up for, you know, from Combo Fiend. Unfortunately, he's a good guy, you know, but I'm expecting that they're going to start making those changes, and by the time we see a couple DLC packs come out, they're going to bring about characters that we are hoping for, perhaps, hopefully something from the list I just read off. But, you know, even if they bring that about in that order, I think it might be too late. I think that, you know, the hype is going to kind of die down, and a game like Dragon Ball FighterZ is just going to steal that audience away, you know, and it just makes very little sense to present all of the new interesting characters in your massive all-star game later as an incentive when you could have presented them up front right away, brand new. Look at all these cool things that are from franchises you care about. Look at the history of Marvel and the history of Capcom coming together, like the previous games kind of were. And then, after the game is established and everyone's gotten used to this new fun game, they then introduce the legacy characters that you saw in the last game. And you go, oh, cool. Hey, look, Spencer's back. Hey, look, Chris and Dante. Right, now I can go back to some familiar feeling teams in this new game, you know? That would have made so much more sense, and I think that would have worked a lot better, to where you could pretty much keep, you know, the same roster, but you just introduce some of these familiar faces way later with your DLC packs, and then you front load the interesting choices. That's not what they did, but that's what they should have done, and I felt it the whole time I was playing this game. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And the people waiting in line, you know, most of the conversations I overheard were just people talking about Dragon Ball, man. You know, that's a weird thing. So that's where it's at. It's the gameplay feels fine, and I think that functionally it's going to serve its purpose. I get to use the word function. But definitely on that novelty casual level, aka where the money lies, they made some poor decisions, and they've got less than 3 months to clean them up. I don't know. I'm happier than ever that Capcom has started paying attention to the competitive community, and it feels almost insane that I'm going to say this, but it feels like they've been paying so much attention to that aspect of it with their games that the casual side is hurting, and that's doing them no favors. It's doing them more damage than anything we've seen in quite a few years now. That's not just happening on this side, but also on the Street Fighter V side. And speaking of Street Fighter V, if we don't see hyper versions of Rashid or Nikali or anyone interesting from that roster showing up, then like just fucking hang it up. What are you doing? That's the most obvious, ridiculous pick that you know, like, I almost didn't include it in the list. I almost forgot, but while I'm at it, like, holy shit, anyone from Street Fighter V showing up in this roster would be the coolest thing. And, like, already that's something that we don't see on either the demo that's out or the leak list. And I can't begin to imagine how you miss such a slam dunk. If this game is what they were billing it as early on, which is, you know, not Marvel vs. Capcom 4, but in fact a new platform to just put out fighters on continuously going into the future, you know, if this is being looked at as a rock band of sorts where there's just tracks coming in constantly as we go forward, then it might end up somewhere okay. It might end up with a roster that people are genuinely excited about and are going to have fun with. But, you know, to get anyone to pay attention to it on launch, the changes they're going to have to make might, unfortunately, be locked in with a schedule that they have to follow that was agreed upon with Marvel. And that probably complicates the situation a lot more than we could understand, because if this was just Capcom doing its own thing, then they would have the ability to, you know, control the production and make whatever changes they need to get people on board with it and sort of, you know, test the feedback again. But now that you're dealing with another company's IP and you're dealing with, again, the syncing of movies with the characters as they're being released, it just gets so much more complex down the line, and you have to now, you know, agree, or rather you have to work with another company's input on your schedule and on your timeline, and that's probably going to create the biggest hurdle in Capcom's ability to fix a lot of these problems. This is one of those videos where I hope it becomes obsolete and wrong as soon as possible. I hope that all the speculation I'm doing is exactly what's happening on the back burner, and time will make it okay. I really, really do.
I guess at the end of the day, the experience I had playing Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was basically the same as playing MVC3 with less characters and a 2v2 system instead of a 3v3 system, and of course the gems that you equip. So the effective feeling of gameplay was so close to the previous game, and the characters I was using and the characters I was playing against were all very similar to the experience I had with Marvel vs. Capcom 3, that there's nothing inherently like bad about that scenario, in the sense that Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was a very fun game to play, and here you're getting more of that same thing, but it's less interesting as a value proposition. And when you put that on the table for $60 or $70 if you're Canadian, and ask people to, you know, come back around and purchase this game that is more or less the same product you got last time with a couple new additions, it kind of, you know, it leaves people in a place where they're like, maybe not. You know, if I'm not somebody that is particularly like hardcore about trying to go out and compete in tournaments and learning how to play the game, if I just kind of want to have fun with some friends, there's so many other fighting games out there right now, and there's others coming, that one in particular doesn't necessarily stand out so strongly on its own. If you're a Marvel fan and you want to get these characters that you've loved from the comic books and the movies, then, you know, that's always going to be there for you. But what I'm trying to say is that, like, when you put this in direct competition with something like Dragon Ball, it leaves so much to be desired. It leaves so much on the table that I feel they're going to have a really hard start if they don't make a massive swerve in the next 2 months. I think the game plan with that roster that we see right now is just not enough to get casual players excited. It's not enough to get hard Marvel fans excited, and I don't know if it'll be enough to get, you know, hardcore FGC players excited. And you don't just have to get them excited, you have to almost like distract them away from the incoming like massive event that is going to be Dragon Ball FighterZ. Yeah, in discussing this on Twitter, like I, you know, there was a couple people coming back and forth with some various thoughts on it, and when we're discussing this as a value proposition, Keats had some interesting things to say. He pointed out that, yeah, if this is true, if those leaks that Rice put out there are to be considered real, and we're going to take that into account moving forward, then 8 out of 28 or 32 characters are new, and 6 more new are going to be considered DLC. You compare that with Injustice 2, which just launched with 29 characters, and 11 of them are returning characters. Or if I think about the NetherRealm's previous entry before that, you take a look at Mortal Kombat X, which had the entire top of the character select screen split in half with brand new cast of, you know, new faces, new generation characters and such, and then the bottom half being returning faces that you're familiar with. Like, they went for a 50% margin on that, and then Injustice doubled down on it and had way more new characters than it did returning characters. So, just as a new product that you're trying to get people interested in, they're not resting on their laurels, and they're not relying on saving money by using previous assets and then putting it out there and hoping to compete with games that are giving you much more new content for the same dollar value, I suppose, if we're going to bring the market discussion into this. If I were in charge of Capcom and I were handling the release of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, biggest thing I would do right now is just straight up take it, possibly consider, if you need to pause production for a little bit, do so. But the money you lose on that initial release where people are unhappy, you don't get that back. Stalling for time to make the product better, it hurts, but in the long run, it pays off. And Tekken 7 took its time. It was, you know, being developed for a really long time, whereas Japan had an early arcade edition of it. We knew the home console version was in development forever, and it came out fantastic for it. Take the time, you know, push it back if you need to, but you have to fix the appearance, you have to fix the way the characters look. Consider different rendering engines to perhaps make the game look brighter and more interesting, make the characters pop a little bit more without necessarily having to do a massive overhaul on all the textures in the game. I think playing with different render options might be one way to help fix that scenario. And of course, the biggest one when it comes to the roster is this one's tricky because everyone has seen who's announced already, but if the DLC is in fact going to include what we assume are new characters and characters from franchises like the ones I've mentioned earlier in the video, you front load that as soon as possible. You make it so that DLC Pack 1 includes, you know, all those beloved Capcom franchises that have been ignored this entire time, and then you take any familiar faces that you were going to reintroduce that are coming from Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and you put those at the end. You make those one of the later DLC packs. So the idea, again, is that people showing up to this product see it, they see the new things, they get excited about what's there, and while they're playing it and enjoying this game, they go, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if I had this character back from that game, and then those characters appear as DLC later. You definitely need to front load what's new, what's shiny, what's interesting, and it's something that comes hand in hand with the territory of an all-star game. If you're working on a franchise entry that is just blank number, you don't necessarily have to consider the same things. You know, personally, I was sad when I saw that my main, Solomon Grundy, didn't show up in Injustice 2, but that doesn't change the fact that they did a fantastic job putting a majority of a new cast on that character select screen and making it interesting for most people checking out the game. When it comes to something that is Marvel versus Capcom, or, you know, Smash Brothers, which is Nintendo's fighter, or even PlayStation All-Stars, any sort of game like that where the concept as a whole is larger than the basic idea of just this fighting game, you have to just put aside, you know, your personal favorites and kind of think about what people as a whole want to see represented, what franchises have not been given enough love that need to come back. And this is definitely one of those cases where there's just not a ton of good reasons to justify why we're seeing the roster we're seeing. Which is a bummer, man, because seeing that first announcement when all we knew about the game was, hey look, there's Mega Man, and hey look, there's X, and there's Captain Marvel, I was really excited about that. The prospect of a whole new, you know, roster to play with was a really fun one, and then as this reveal train continued to roll on, and we continued to just see more of the same characters from the last game, it just, you know, it killed off a lot of that excitement and just gift wrapped it and handed it over to Arc System Works with Dragon Ball FighterZ. So, hoping for the best. I really do think that they're eventually going to end up in an alright place, but they have to have started like yesterday on fixing these things that the majority of players and people giving feedback online are concerned about. This is the part where I guess end it with like a line of signing off from my mother's basement, or that's what I would do as the Armchair CEO. I don't know. How do you end this? I don't fucking know. Can we just cut to the Woolie Versus logo thing? That thing's pretty cool, I think. Yeah, fuck it, I'll just cut to that. I think that's fine, right? Is that okay? That was good? I don't know. Maybe.